The afternoon sun, a pale gold wash against the city's steel and glass, filtered through the towering arched windows of the Gilded Fork. It was a light that didn't warm so much as it illuminated, catching the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, restless diamonds. Inside, the restaurant was a cathedral of manufactured tranquility. The clinking of silver on porcelain was a delicate, hushed percussion, underscored by the murmur of conversations kept deliberately low, as if sharing secrets too valuable for the open air. This was a place where wealth was not displayed, it was inhaled, a part of the very atmosphere. Into this carefully curated world stepped Mr. Rin Ishikawa. He was an island of quiet contradiction. While the other patrons wore the tailored armor of Western business, dark suits, crisp shirts, and polished Italian leather, he was dressed in a traditional gray kimono of raw silk, its texture subtly uneven, its color the soft, profound shade of a storm cloud over the sea. His feet were clad in simple zori, and his movements were measured, each step a deliberate placement on the plush, wine-colored carpet. On his face, a pair of minimalist, round glasses rested, framing eyes that seemed to absorb everything without judgment, like a deep, still lake. The maitre d', a man whose smile was a marvel of practiced engineering, approached him with a barely perceptible hesitation. The kimono was an anomaly, a variable he couldn't immediately place on the restaurant's rigid social hierarchy. "A table for one, sir?" he asked, his voice a smooth, professional purr. Ren simply nodded. He was led to a discreet table in the corner, one that afforded him a panoramic view of the dining room. He sat, his posture erect yet relaxed, a study in serene composure. The manager himself, a tall, impeccably dressed man named Alistair Finch, soon glided over. His charm was a tangible force, a warm front moving through the room. "A pleasure to have you with us this afternoon, sir," Finch said, his eyes flicking over the quality of Ren's silk kimono, making a swift, silent calculation. "May I recommend our tasting menu? The chef has prepared an exquisite journey of flavors today." Ren looked at the menu, his gaze passing over the elaborate descriptions before settling on a single item. "The Emperor's Cut," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "The Kobe, medium rare." Finch's smile widened, a flicker of triumphant appraisal in his eyes. It was the most expensive item on the menu, a cut of beef so ludicrously priced it was more a statement of power than a meal. "An excellent choice, sir. Truly, the finest in the world." He bowed slightly and retreated, his walk infused with the satisfaction of a successful transaction. Rin watched him go, his expression unreadable. He wasn't here for the steak. He was here for the silence between the notes, the truth hidden behind the performance. Rin Ishikawa had not built a global empire by admiring the polished surfaces of his acquisitions. He had built it by understanding the foundations, by knowing where the cracks were likely to form. His company, Omni Hospitality Group, had recently acquired the international chain that owned the Gilded Fork, a detail that remained confidential, known only to a handful of executives in a Tokyo boardroom. The reports he received were glowing. They spoke of profit margins, stellar customer reviews, and impeccable service standards. They were sterile documents, filled with numbers and charts that told him nothing of the restaurant's soul. And so, he had come alone, unannounced, a ghost in his own machine. He found the experience of being a customer deeply isolating. The deference he received was not for him, the man, but for the presumed weight of his wallet, a weight they inferred from his quiet confidence and his choice of attire, which they mistook for eccentric wealth rather than cultural habit. He felt like a specimen under glass, observed and categorized. This loneliness was a familiar companion, a shadow cast by the mountain of his fortune. It was the price of a life lived at a remove, where every interaction was filtered through the lens of what people thought they could gain from him. He had learned to see the world through the carefully constructed performances of others, to read the subtle tells in a too-eager smile or the flicker of avarice in a maitre d's eyes. He had come to the Gilded Fork not as an owner, but as a test. He wanted to see if there was any genuine artistry left beneath the veneer of luxury, any human integrity that hadn't been corroded by the relentless pursuit of profit. He ordered the most expensive steak not as an indulgence, but as a provocation. An item like that was a locus of institutional pride, or a magnet for its corruption. It was a test of character, for the chef, for the manager, for the entire establishment. He adjusted his glasses, his gaze sweeping across the room. He saw a world of transactions disguised as experiences, a ballet of polite fictions. And in that moment, he felt the profound weariness of a man who owned everything and was still searching for something real. The restaurant itself was a masterclass in calculated opulence. Every surface gleamed under the soft, recessed lighting, the dark wood of the paneling, the polished brass fixtures, the crystal-clear water goblets that refracted the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The air was scented with a faint, pleasant mixture of beeswax, expensive perfume, and the distant, savory promise of the kitchen. Alastair Finch was the high priest of this temple. He moved through the dining room with a predator's grace, his posture perfect, his smile a weaponized form of hospitality. He would pause at one table to laugh at a patron's joke, his head tilted at just the right angle of feigned amusement. He would materialize at another to personally top off a wine glass, his movements fluid and economical. But Ren, a connoisseur of human behavior, saw the machinery beneath the charm. He saw the way Finch's eyes were never still, constantly scanning the room, assessing, calculating. They weren't the eyes of a host. They were the eyes of an auditor. He watched Finch speak to his staff, and the mask would slip for a fraction of a second. The warm smile would tighten at the edges, a flash of cold impatience in his eyes as he issued a clipped directive to a busboy. The performance was seamless, but it was a performance nonetheless. Ren saw it in the way the waiters held their bodies, a certain rigid tension in their shoulders, a forced placidity on their faces. They were actors on a stage, and Finch was their demanding, ever-watchful director. The entire establishment felt like an intricate clockwork mechanism, each part moving in perfect, soulless synchrony. It was efficient, it was beautiful, but it was hollow. There was no joy in the service, only a drilled precision. There was no warmth, only a practiced imitation of it. This was the rot that Ren had suspected, the slow decay of spirit that spreadsheets and profit reports could never capture. It was the culture of a place, and from his corner table, he could feel that the culture of the Gilded Fork was one of fear, ruled by a man who valued appearance above all else. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that a culture built on such a fragile foundation was bound to be corrupt. Then, she approached his table. Her name tag, pinned neatly to her crisp black uniform, read Layla. She was young, perhaps 23, and moved with a quiet efficiency that stood in stark contrast to Finch's theatrical grace. Where he was a performance, she was a presence. There was a weariness about her, a subtle shadow under her eyes that no amount of professional composure could entirely erase. Her shoes, though polished, showed the faint creases of countless hours spent on her feet. She held the heavy silver water pitcher with a steady hand, refilling his glass without a single drop spilling onto the pristine white linen. She did it silently, her movements economical and respectful of his space. Unlike Finch, she did not try to engage him in conversation or offer unsolicited recommendations. She simply did her job with a focused, unassuming dignity. "Is there anything else I can get for you while you wait, sir?" she asked, her voice soft and even, without the artificial brightness of the other servers. Ren looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw the slight fraying on the edge of her sleeve, a tiny detail that spoke of a uniform worn long and hard. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, a quick, observant quality that took in his quiet demeanor without the fawning curiosity of the others. There was a resilience in her posture, a strength that seemed to come from a deep, internal source. She was not playing a role. She was a young woman trying to get through her shift, carrying a weight that seemed heavier than a water pitcher. "No, thank you," Ren replied. "This is fine." She gave a small, respectful nod and retreated, disappearing back into the intricate dance of the dining room. Ren watched her go, a flicker of interest stirring within him. Amidst all the artifice and illusion of the Gilded Fork, Layla felt real. She was the first authentic thing he had encountered since he walked through the door. He saw her a few minutes later, speaking quietly to an elderly couple at a nearby table, a genuine smile briefly touching her lips as they thanked her. In that small, unscripted moment, he saw the person behind the uniform, someone kind, someone with a core of integrity that the restaurant's oppressive atmosphere had not yet managed to extinguish. Later, Ren's gaze followed Layla as she carried a tray of empty dishes toward the swinging doors of the kitchen. Just as she was about to push through, Finch intercepted her, his body blocking her path. He steered her into a small, shadowed alcove near the service corridor, a space just barely visible from Ren's vantage point. The manager's charming public facade had vanished completely. His face was a mask of cold fury, his body language aggressive and intimidating. Ren couldn't hear the words, but he could read the venom in Finch's posture, the way he leaned in close to Layla, his finger jabbing toward her chest. Layla stood perfectly still, her back straight, her chin up. She did not cower, but Ren could see the subtle tremor in her hands, the whitening of her knuckles as she gripped the side of the heavy tray. She was absorbing his tirade with a stoicism that was both heartbreaking and admirable. Finch's voice rose just enough for a few sharp, cruel words to carry across the dining room's hushed atmosphere. Absolutely useless, one more mistake and you're gone. Do you understand me? There are 100 girls who would kill for your job. He finished his assault, gave her a look of pure disgust, and then, in a stunning display of emotional gymnastics, turned and glided back into the dining room, his pleasant smile instantly restored as he greeted a newly arrived party. Layla remained in the alcove for a long moment, her eyes closed. She took a single, deep, steadying breath. Ren watched her shoulders rise and fall. He saw her compose herself, locking away the fear and humiliation behind a wall of professional necessity. When she finally pushed through the kitchen doors, her face was a neutral mask once more, but Ran had seen the crack. He had seen the vulnerability she fought so hard to conceal. The threat wasn't just about a job, it was about survival. He understood now the source of the weariness in her eyes. It wasn't just physical exhaustion from a long shift, it was the soul-crushing weight of working under a tyrant, of knowing that her livelihood depended on the whims of a cruel, capricious man. The stakes of her life were impossibly high, and her quiet dignity was not just a personality trait, it was a shield, a form of silent, desperate resistance. A quiet bond, unspoken and invisible to everyone else in the room, began to form between the billionaire and the waitress. It was forged not in words, but in shared glances and mutual observation. Ren found himself watching her, not with the detached analysis he applied to others, but with a growing sense of respect and empathy. He saw her reset a crooked fork on an empty table with meticulous care. He saw her offer a quiet word of encouragement and a quick smile to a young busboy who had nearly dropped a stack of plates, a small act of kindness that went unnoticed by management. These were the details that mattered, the small brushstrokes that painted the true portrait of a person's character. When another waiter came to take his full order, Ren politely waved him off. "I will wait for Layla," he said simply. A few minutes later, she returned to his table, a faint look of surprise in her eyes. "You wish to see me, sir?" "Yes," Ren said, gesturing to the menu. "The wine list. I am undecided. What do you honestly think of the Bordeaux?" The one from Saint-Emilion. He was testing her. He knew Finch would have trained his staff to push the most expensive vintages, regardless of the pairing. He watched her closely, waiting for the practiced upsell. Instead, Layla paused, her expression thoughtful. "It's a very bold wine, sir," she said, her voice low and confidential. "Very robust. To be honest, with the delicate marbling of the Kobe, I think it might overwhelm the flavor. The sommelier would probably recommend it, but if you want my personal opinion, the Pinot Noir from Oregon is much more complimentary. It's also less than half the price," she said, the last part almost in a whisper, a small act of conspiracy, of honesty. She had chosen to serve him, not the restaurant's profit margin. It was a small rebellion, a quiet assertion of her own integrity. Ren felt a sense of profound affirmation. He had found it, the one real thing in this entire gilded cage. "Thank you, Layla," he said, his voice imbued with a warmth that surprised even himself. "I will have the Pinot Noir," she nodded, a flicker of relief in her eyes, and went to place the order. In that simple exchange, a silent understanding passed between them. He saw her courage, and she, perhaps for the first time that day, saw a customer who valued her honesty more than the performance of luxury. The moment arrived with the quiet ceremony befitting a dish of its reputation. Layla carried the large, circular plate with both hands, her movements graceful and sure. She placed it before him, a perfectly cooked piece of meat resting in the center, its seared crust a rich mahogany, its scent a complex perfume of butter and beef. "Your emperor's cut, sir," she said, her professional mask firmly in place. "Please enjoy your meal," as she leaned forward to set the plate down, her right hand, for a fraction of a second, brushed against his. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible touch, but it was enough. When she drew her hand back, a tiny, tightly folded square of paper lay on the white tablecloth beside his hand, partially concealed by the base of his wine glass. It was no bigger than a postage stamp. Her eyes met his for a single, charged second. In them, he saw a maelstrom of fear, resolve, and a desperate plea for understanding. Then, she was gone, turning away with practiced smoothness to attend to another table, leaving him alone with the steak and its silent, explosive secret. Ren's heart rate quickened. He let his hand casually drift over, shielding the note from view as his fingers closed around it. He brought his hand to his lap, his movements slow and deliberate, betraying none of the sudden, cold tension that gripped him. Under the table, he carefully unfolded the small piece of paper. The handwriting was neat, precise, but clearly hurried. The message was short, a dagger of a sentence. "The steak is a lie. It's prime-grade sirloin, not Kobe. They charge you for the emperor's cut and pocket the difference. Finch does this to guests he thinks won't know. Be careful." The world around him seemed to recede. The hushed chatter, the clinking of glasses, the soft music, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. The words on the paper burned with the cold, hard clarity of truth. It wasn't just a simple case of overcharging. It was a calculated, systemic fraud. It was a symptom of the deeper disease he had sensed from the moment he walked in, a culture of corruption, presided over by a man who saw customers not as guests, but as marks. And Layla, in her quiet, desperate act of courage, had just handed him the proof. She had risked everything, her job, her livelihood, on the hope that he would be a person who cared about the truth. The steak sat before him, a beautiful, expensive lie. His appetite was gone, replaced by a cold, rising anger. Ren Ishikawa did not react. Outwardly, he was the picture of calm. He picked up his knife and fork, cut a small piece of the steak, and lifted it to his mouth. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully, his expression one of mild appreciation. He took a sip of the Pinot Noir, the excellent, honestly recommended wine, and nodded to himself. He was performing now, too, playing the part of the satisfied, oblivious tourist. But inside, a machine had been activated. His mind, honed by decades of navigating corporate intrigue and hostile takeovers, was already processing, planning, and executing. The anger was there, a cold, hard stone in his gut, but he channeled it into pure, strategic focus. He knew he couldn't confront Finch directly. It would be his word against the managers, and Layla would be the immediate casualty, fired for her perceived betrayal. He needed irrefutable proof, a case so airtight that Finch would have no escape. He finished a few more bites of the fraudulent steak before delicately placing his silverware on the plate. He dabbed his lips with the linen napkin, leaving the majority of the meal untouched. He caught Layla's eye across the room. She was watching him, her face pale with anxiety. He gave her the slightest, most subtle of nods, a gesture so small it was almost invisible, but he knew she would understand. Message received. "I believe you." He saw her shoulders relax by a fraction of an inch, a small release of the immense tension she was holding. Excusing himself from the table, he walked toward the restrooms, his pace unhurried. Once inside the gleaming marble corridor, He bypassed the men's room and continued to a fire exit at the end of the hall. He stepped into the sterile quiet of the stairwell, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, plunging him into a world away from the restaurant's perfumed air. He pulled out his phone, a sleek, unassuming device, and dialed a number from his encrypted contacts. It was answered on the first ring. "Sato," Rin said, his voice low and sharp, stripped of all pleasantries. "I have a situation." The Gilded Fork, Manhattan. There was a pause, then the calm, efficient voice of his global head of operations. "Sir, I need a full, immediate, and discreet audit of their prime meat supply chain. I want to see every invoice from their Kobe beef supplier for the past 12 months and cross-reference it with their point-of-sale data for every order of the Emperor's Cut. I also want you to find their supplier for standard prime sirloin and run the same analysis. I suspect a discrepancy. A very large 1-inch. Understood, sir," Sato replied, the sound of keyboard clicks already audible. "How discreet?" "Silent. No one at the restaurant, especially the manager, Alistair Finch, is to know they are being investigated. I also need eyes and ears inside. Can you get a covert team into the kitchen and administrative office posing as health inspectors, or a new corporate audit team from the old parent company? I want them in place within the hour. I want access to inventory logs, waste reports, and employee files. Specifically, the file for a waitress named Layla Washington." "It will be done, sir," Sato said, his voice a blade of pure competence. "I will have preliminary data for you within 90 minutes. "Good," Rin said, and ended the call. He stood in the silence of the stairwell for a moment, the folded note still clutched in his hand. It was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a declaration of war. Rin returned to his table as if he had merely been freshening up. He ordered a coffee and sat, nursing it slowly, turning his corner of the restaurant into an observation post. From the outside, he was a solitary diner finishing his meal. On the inside, he was the command center of a rapidly unfolding operation. His phone, resting on his lap beneath the tablecloth, began to vibrate with encrypted messages from Sato. The first message was a satellite image of the restaurant's delivery entrance. A few minutes later, a new message, a nondescript white van, belonging to a municipal food safety contractor, was pulling into the alley. Sato's team was in position. Rin watched Finch patrol the dining room, oblivious, his smug confidence a testament to his own arrogance. He believed he was untouchable, protected by the glowing profit margins he manufactured through deceit. He saw Layla moving through her duties, a quiet storm of anxiety raging behind her professional calm. She avoided his gaze now, terrified of giving anything away. Rin knew he had to protect her. The next series of messages from Sato came in a rapid burst. They were images sent one after another. The first was a copy of an invoice from an elite, certified Kobe beef supplier in Japan. The Gilded Fork had ordered a small, almost token amount once every quarter, just enough to maintain their status as a licensed vendor. The next image was an invoice from a domestic meat wholesaler in New Jersey. The purchase orders were vast, for hundreds of pounds of prime-grade sirloin, delivered weekly. Then came the damning evidence: internal inventory logs, photographed by Sato's operative in the kitchen. They showed the high-grade sirloin being logged under a cryptic internal code. Finally, a summary from Sato. Sales data showed the restaurant sold an average of 15 Emperor's Cuts per day, a volume utterly impossible to sustain with their infrequent Kobe purchases. The fraud was systematic, blatant, and immensely profitable. The final message from Sato was a text file, a summary of Alistair Finch's bank records, legally obtained through a corporate malfeasance clause. It showed large, regular cash deposits that far exceeded his salary. He wasn't just stealing from the customers. He was stealing from the company. He was stealing from Rin. Rin felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. He now had the weapon he needed. He sent one final message to Sato. "Get the regional board members here. Tell them it's an emergency dinner meeting at my request. And have a security detail waiting at the front and back entrances. No one leaves." He placed the phone on the table, face down. He signaled for his check. It was time to bring the curtain down on Alistair Finch's performance. The check arrived, presented in a small leather folio. Ren glanced at the total. The fraudulent steak was listed at its full, exorbitant price. He placed his credit card inside without a word. As Layla came to collect it, he spoke to her quietly. Layla, in a few minutes some people will be arriving to meet me. Things may become dramatic. Whatever happens, please know that you have nothing to fear. Your courage did not go unnoticed. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a dawning, fragile hope. She simply nodded, unable to speak, and walked away to process his payment. 5 minutes later, the atmosphere in the Gilded Fork shifted. 3 men and 2 women in severe, dark business suits entered the restaurant. They moved with an aura of authority that made the maitre d' falter. They scanned the room, their eyes landing on Ren. They approached his table with grim purpose. Alistair Finch, sensing a shift in the room's power dynamic, hurried over, his host's smile plastered on his face. "Good evening," he began. "Do you have a reservation?" "They are with me," Ren said calmly, rising from his chair. Finch looked from the severe faces of the board members to the quiet man in the kimono, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand. I am Ren Ishikawa," he said, his voice carrying a new weight, a tone of absolute command that silenced the nearby tables. "I am the chairman of Omni Hospitality Group. Your new owner." Finch's face went slack. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a waxy, pale sheen. The charming smile dissolved, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "Mr. Ishikawa," he stammered, his voice suddenly thin and reedy. I had no idea." "This is an honor." "The honor," Ren said, his voice dropping to a dangerously cold level, "is all mine. We were just admiring your remarkable profitability. Tell me, Mr. Finch, what is the secret to your success? How do you manage to sell so much of the Emperor's cut?" Finch swallowed hard. We have an excellent supplier, sir." "The best, do you?" Ren replied, his eyes like chips of ice. He gestured to one of the board members, who produced a tablet. On the screen, glowing in the dim light, were the 2 sets of invoices, the meager orders of real Kobe and the massive purchases of sirloin. "Because our records show that for every 1 pound of Kobe beef you purchase, you sell 50 pounds of it to your customers." A miracle of culinary mathematics, the color drained completely from Finch's face. He looked around wildly, like a trapped animal seeking an escape route. The patrons at the surrounding tables were now silent, watching the drama unfold. That's a clerical error," Finch sputtered. A misunderstanding. Was it also a clerical error when you threatened one of your waitresses this afternoon?" Ren continued, his voice relentless. "When you created a culture of fear to ensure no one would expose your pathetic little scam?" He turned his gaze toward Layla, who stood frozen near the service station. "Layla, would you please come here?" Trembling, she walked toward the table. Ren looked at her, then back at Finch. "This young woman possesses more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body." She risked her livelihood to tell the truth. "What did you risk, Mr. Finch?" "Nothing. You simply preyed on the trust of your guests and the fear of your staff." Ren gestured to the entrance. 2 uniformed security guards had quietly entered and were now flanking the door. "You are fired, Mr. Finch. Your assets will be frozen pending a full investigation into felony fraud. These gentlemen will escort you out." Finch stared, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed world he had built for himself had just been demolished in under 5 minutes. His reign was over. The security guards took Finch by the arms, his resistance collapsing into a pathetic, defeated slump. They led him through the silent, stunned dining room and out into the night. The performance was finally over. The silence that followed was broken by Ren Ishikawa's calm, authoritative voice. He addressed the remaining staff, who were gathered in a state of collective shock. "The Gilded Fork is now under new management," he announced. "My management. From this day forward, this will be a place of integrity, not deception. A place of respect, not fear. You will all be treated with the dignity you deserve, and you will be expected to extend that same dignity to our guests." He then turned his full attention to Layla. She stood before him, her hands clasped together, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He gave her a soft, reassuring smile. "Layla Washington," he said, his voice resonating with sincerity. "In my world, courage and honesty are the most valuable commodities. They are far rarer and far more precious than any cut of beef." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the quiet room. "I am establishing a new global division within Omni Hospitality Group. It will be an office of employee integrity and quality assurance, responsible for ensuring that the standards of our brand are upheld with honor, not just on paper. It will have the power to investigate any manager in any of our properties worldwide." He looked directly into her eyes. "And I would be honored if you would agree to run it. We will provide you with a full scholarship to complete your education in business management and hospitality, and your starting salary will reflect the immense value I place on your character." A collective gasp went through the staff. Layla stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a small, choked sound came out. She simply nodded, tears finally tracing paths down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Ren Ishikawa looked around the room, at the faces of the staff, at the board members, and finally back at the table where the fraudulent steak still sat. True value, he reflected, was never about the price tag. It was about the honesty of the ingredients, the integrity of the hands that prepared it, and the courage of those who refused to let a beautiful lie triumph over a simple, unadorned truth. In the heart of a gilded cage, he had found something real after all. He had found a person of worth, and in doing so, had reaffirmed his own purpose.